Greetings all you movie junkies and entertainment lovers, and welcome to another top 10 video. Today we're going to be counting down my top 10 most underrated horror movies. Now these aren't my top 10 personal all-time favorite horror films. These are just 10 horror films that I think either don't get the praise that they deserve or don't deserve the hate that they get. And as I always point out, it's important to remember this is just my personal list of top 10 most underrated horror movies. So at number 10, we have Jason X. And man, is this movie divided. It's even divided for myself for a long time. I honestly wasn't really sure what to make of it. You could tell when watching it that you're really not meant to take it seriously. It isn't really even trying to be a Friday the 13th film to begin with. In fact, the way that I like to describe this movie to anybody who's never seen it before is that it's essentially a science fiction monster movie where the monster in this case just happens to be Jason Voorhees. In a lot of ways, I feel it's a fun mix of genres. Certainly not a great film, but it is one that I personally have a lot of fun with and don't really think it deserves the hate it gets. So that's Jason X at number 10. And then at number 9, we have Critters 4. I don't understand what the big problem with this one is. I mean, I really love the first two Critters films, particularly the second one. I think it's one of those few sequels that's actually better than the original film. And then the third and fourth films ultimately went to direct-to-video, and the third wasn't really all that good. It was kind of just sort of the Critters take over an apartment complex, not much really happens. Then we have Critters 4. Takes the direction that a lot of franchises at the time were taking, which was going to space. And of course, as I mentioned, we had the Friday the 13th franchise go to space, the Hellraiser franchise went to space, the Leprechaun franchise went to space. But unlike those other franchises, this is the one where it actually made sense for the Critters to go to space because, well, that's where they came from originally. Perhaps not as self-aware as the previous Critters movies, but I don't know, there's something about sort of the low-budget, retro, futuristic, alien-esque feel of this one that I just really dig. That's Critters 4 at number 9. And then at number 8, we have Psycho 4, The Beginning. Comparing it to just not even the original Psycho, but Psycho 2 is a very difficult thing to live up to. Psycho 3 was kind of an interesting film. It kind of went into more traditional slasher territory. And really the only issue I have with that film is that the ending twist kind of retcons the ending twist of the previous movie. Then we cut to Psycho 4, which is a very interesting film because it's partially a sequel, but at the same time it's also partially a prequel. It's actually written by Joe Stefano, who wrote the screenplay for the original Psycho film. And it's the only one of the sequels to feature the iconic Bernard Herrmann theme. Most notably, it was the very last time that Anthony Perkins played the role of Norman Bates. Watching this movie today, after it got a beautiful 4K restoration from Arrow, you would never know that this was a made-for-TV movie. In fact, I believe it actually had the same budget as Psycho 2. That film, funny enough, was the opposite, where it was originally going to be a made-for-TV movie, and then they decided to make it a theatrical film. Ultimately, it just works honestly really solid as an ending chapter to the Norman Bates story. One kind of issue with it is that it seemingly kind of ignores the events of Psycho 2 and 3, but it doesn't necessarily dismiss Psycho 2 and 3, if that makes sense. But in your head, you could still kind of say that it does take place sometime later. But again, like I said, if you really sort of overthink certain things, there's certain logistical things that don't quite match up. It's more of a proper continuation slash prequel to the original film that it is a sequel to Psycho 2 and 3, even though again it's called Psycho 4 The Beginning. This film is, I think, quite a bit better than Psycho 3 in my opinion, but I wouldn't personally put it on quite the same level as Psycho 2. So that's Psycho 4 The Beginning at number 8. And at number 7 we have Larry Cohen's The Stuff. Perhaps maybe a lot of you, I'm sure, might not be aware of, but basically the main plot of it is that it's essentially about this mysterious new ice cream product, simply known as The Stuff, that, well, it turns out that it may not even be from this earth. In fact, it's actually consuming the people that eat it. Very interesting concept. Film that honestly I think just doesn't get talked about enough, and it has one of the all-time great horror movie taglines, which is, are you eating it or is it eating you? When people talk about Larry Cohen, the one film that I think that a lot of people bring up is Q the Winged Serpent. But for me personally, of all the films I've seen of his, at least, the one that honestly honestly sticks out to me is this one. And I think honestly a lot of it still holds up pretty well, and it will definitely put you off of ice cream. So if you're somebody that loves ice cream, maybe this movie isn't quite for you. That's The Stuff at number 7. And then at number 6, we have Brain Scan. It was essentially supposed to be the start of a whole new franchise. They were trying to make it like the new Nightmare on Elm Street, with the trickster as like the new Freddy Krueger. And for those who haven't seen it, it's basically about a lonely teenage horror fan who essentially discovers this virtual reality game where you commit a brutal murder, finds out that the acts that he is committing in the game are in fact real, and he's being pinned as the killer. And T. Ryder Smith, who played the trickster in this, and particularly the makeup and look that they went with, I thought was great. And you could definitely see how in another universe, had they made it a few years earlier, it could have become a whole nother franchise. I mean, if Leprechaun and Children of the Corn can become franchises and have multiple sequels, Brain Scan definitely could have. It's a shame because I feel like there was a lot of interesting sort of potential here, and especially nowadays that we're living in this world where virtual reality is very much real. It's a story that in some ways is more relevant now, even though a lot of the digital effects and stuff of it are very much sort of the time. So that's Brain Scan at number 6. And then at number 5, we have Return of the Living Dead Free. The Return of the Living Dead franchise is quite odd in that really all the films, none of them are really connected to one another, but each of the films, at least the original 3 films, I don't know, I never bothered to watch the last 2 if I'm being honest, are essentially standalone stories. And the original film, of course, is one that I'm sure many of you are aware of, and it's one of my all-time favorites. And the second one kind of became more of a sort of horror comedy element to it. And this one goes in a completely different tonal direction. This film essentially is like the Romeo and Juliet of horror movies. It's about this distraught teenager who performs this operation on his girlfriend after she ends up getting killed in a motorcycle accident. And so he uses the horrific results that he saw in a top secret project that his father is involved with to bring her back. What he doesn't realize is that, of course, she comes back essentially as a zombie. We get to see her slowly make the transition over the film. It's a movie that really has no business being as good as it is, honestly, but it really works well, I have to say. I mean, I had for many years wanted to watch this, and then it was just, 2 or 3 years ago that I finally watched this for the first time, and I was like, wow, that was great. The fact that it was able to make an impact on me was really quite surprising to me, and honestly did not expect it to be, especially towards the end, for it to have much of an emotional impact as it did. It's a film that you can see, you could see where it's going, and you just really don't want it to go there. And I especially related a lot to the main character and a lot of decisions that he made, because I couldn't help but think that, if I'm in the situation, I would make the same decisions that ultimately ended up, turning out with horrific results. And it's just a really great film that nobody really talks about. And I think in a way that's because of the Return of the Living Dead name, that I think a lot of people just kind of look at it, oh, it's just, Return of the Living Dead in name only. And it's kind of very similar to Halloween 3. I think what happened with Halloween 3, Season of the Witch, where people were like, it's not Michael Myers, it's not this. And then over the years, people kind of came around to it. I think that this film is destined to have the same life, because honestly, it's a really great movie. It has no connection to the original Return of the Living Dead or the second movie, but just on its own works as a great original film. So that's Return of the Living Dead 3 at number 5. At number 4, we have The Night of the Living Dead 1990 remake. Definitely gotten a lot more love in recent years. I think at the time, people kind of dismissed it. And even Tom Savini, of course, the legendary makeup effects artist Tom Savini, who directed this one, I think that it's actually better than the original film. And I know that that's like sacrilege to zombie fans and stuff. And, the original Night of the Living Dead, of course, is a great movie. And of course, we wouldn't have any of this other stuff if it wasn't for that film. On a purely technical aspect, I feel that this movie is just better in every way, and I think even Tom Savini has kind of come around on this film in recent years. This movie is, I think, absolutely great, and whenever I intend on watching Night of the Living Dead, this is normally the version that I decide to watch, honestly. And this actually was the only of the remakes of George Romero's films where George Romero himself was actually involved. In fact, he wrote the screenplay for the remake of the film. So it definitely has that Romero DNA in it. And I think, that with Tom Savini, even though again he didn't do a lot of what he wanted to do. And one of the big things that I think this movie improved on was the character of Barbara. Because I'm sorry, the character of Barbara in the original is probably one of the most useless, insufferable characters in horror movie history. I mean, really, her purpose is just to kind of take us, the viewers, into where we end up in the story. Here, they actually, not only do they do that, but they actually make the character of Barbara not useless, and they actually do something with the character. It would have been kind of interesting to see where they went with this version of the character. It ends in a really great way that's kind of, it flips the ending of the original Night of the Living Dead, which I thought was cool. So it's honestly, I just think it's a great remake, and overall just a film that definitely deserves more love, because I honestly do prefer it to the original film. So that's Night of the Living Dead, the remake, at number 4. And at number 3, we have Creepshow 2. Already been on a few of my lists in the past. I don't think I need to talk too much about it. For me, I just think that this is an absolutely fantastic sequel, and it surprises me all the time how low a lot of people put this in comparison to the original film. And the original film is one of my favorite horror movies ever, and the sequel, again, much like the Night of the Living Dead remake, definitely has his DNA, because even though he didn't direct it, he did write the screenplay for it. Honestly, even though it doesn't have as many stories as the original Creepshow, it does do an absolutely fantastic job of getting that sort of same tone, look, and feel, just on a slightly smaller budget. I think all 3 stories work pretty well, honestly, and again, are pretty much almost on par with the stories from the original film. It's just there's not quite as many of them. Shame that we couldn't have gotten, more Creepshow movies in this format, in this style. Honestly, I would have liked more. Again, I just think that this film has always been underrated. I definitely recognize that I'm in the minority on this, but again, I just think it's a fantastic movie. Is it quite on the same level as the original Creepshow? No. As far as sequels go, I think it's pretty worthy. So that's Creepshow 2 at number 3. And then at number 2, we have Wes Craven's New Nightmare. This is a movie that I definitely want to talk more about at some point, and I have been seeing a lot more people putting a spotlight on it in recent years. It's kind of weird, because I know a lot of you probably thinking, why am I putting this on my most underrated horror movies list? Because traditionally, this is considered to be one of the better films of the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise. And yet I feel, and I think a lot of other you probably might agree with me on this, is that it just doesn't really get talked about that much. And I know for some people, they even think that it's the best film of the franchise. This film very much, of course, just takes the concept of Nightmare on Elm Street and really just takes it to a new level, where now the lines between dream and reality aren't just blurred, but the lines between movie and reality are blurred. And only Wes Craven could figure that out and juggle it in a way that would make it work. And it was really quite poetic to have Wes Craven come in and essentially deliver what ended up being the last chapter of the original Nightmare on Elm Street series. And honestly, it's a pretty fitting fact that, we went from that original concept to now this concept. And I think Heather Langenkamp's performance in this, of her performance in the 3 movies, is her best performance. I thought she was absolutely fantastic in this. It's definitely a bit of a slow burn, but it's a really good slow burn. I think I like how it takes its time, and I think there's just a lot of great aspects of it that sort of don't get talked about as much. So it's definitely one I'm going to be talking about more in the future. I just know it. So that's Wes Craven's New Nightmare at number 2. And then at number 1, we have Gremlins 2, The New Batch. This film, I don't really think I have to talk about that much. I've already talked about it a lot. It's already been on several of my other lists, but I'm pretty sure that this is the first time it's been number 1. Actually, no, that's not true. I think it was number 1 on my most underrated sequels list. So the fact that it was number 1 on that list, and the fact that it is technically a horror film, pretty much, I guess, de facto makes it number 1 on this list as well. I've already gone on to why I think this film is great, and I think the only thing left for me to do at this point is probably to just do a proper review, so I'll probably will do that at this point. I just absolutely love this movie. It's one of those movies where just every single aspect for me personally works. One thing I've always said about it, and I will continue to say about it, is that even if you took the Gremlins out of this movie, it would still be a fun, entertaining movie. You could argue that, it's more of a comedy than it is a horror, but I mean, it's a horror comedy, so it still technically counts. And there's just so many great, wonderful moments. The practical effects in this are absolutely fantastic. I've watched it dozens of times. I've watched it dozens more times. I've talked about it dozens of times. I'll probably talk about it dozens of more times. I honestly do prefer it to the original film. I think it's a fantastic movie. It has everything I love. I know not everybody feels the same, but that's how I feel, and I will continue to sing its praises for the rest of my time. So that's Gremlins 2 The New Batch at number 1. Alright guys, that was my list of top 10 most underrated horror movies. Feel free to jump in the comments down below and let me know what your top 10 most underrated horror movies would be. Be sure to subscribe for more videos, and until next time, be sure to consume as much entertainment as humanly possible, and I will see you in the next video.